Apologies to Gillian Martin, Mary Fee, Rona Mackay and Alistair Allen for being unable to reach your question. And I would ask members to have a think about how long questions and answers are taking. We'll move on to the next item of business. The next item of business is portfolio questions on the rural economy. Members should note that question 4 has been withdrawn and that therefore it's only questions 6 and 8 which are grouped together. Anyone who wishes to ask a supplementary on either of these questions should press the request to speak button in the usual way. Question number 1, Liz Smith.
To ask the Scottish Government when the Agriculture and Climate Change Strategic Group will next meet.
Marie Goujon.
The group's most recent meeting was actually on Monday of this week, which I attended for the first half.
Liz Smith.
Could I thank the Minister for that response? The Minister will know that the media report suggests that agriculture in Scotland is responsible for 23.9% of all emissions. And despite this, the NFUS reports that the, and I quote, the greenhouse gas footprint of beef produced in the UK is 60% lower than the average for the rest of the world. So what more does the Minister think can be done by the Scottish Government to ensure that the Scottish public feel that they are supporting local beef producers and not contributing to climate change problems?
Marie Goujon.
That is exactly what we want to do and what we do, because I would say that, and I really want to make this message clear, that the Scottish Government certainly does not see farmers as the problem here, but very much part of the solution. And I think what hasn't helped in recent times is the downright misrepresentation that we've seen in various TV programmes recently, which have conflated systems around the world with farming systems here when they're absolutely nothing alike. Now, there is a lot of work to be done, but we also need to better recognise the good work that farmers do and what already takes place and how we can better advertise that and get the word out about what's happening. And to that end, there are various schemes that we're working on, one which was actually in the press this week. I believe it was referenced in the Press and Journal, and that work is being led by the Scottish Agricultural Organisation Society with financial support from the Scottish Government, and that initiative is called Carbon Positive. And that really aims to gather data on soils, woodland, livestock and renewable energy to give a complete picture of what farms and crofts are doing to mitigate against climate change. And that will ultimately be a national online programme for the farming industry to give farmers all the information that they need about their contribution to and mitigation of climate change. And SEOS, working with James Hutton Institute and Scottish Forestry, are gathering data on carbon sequestration for the sector, as well as working with the A&M group, who are a North East Farmers Cooperative. They're involved in the livestock part of the programme through its Farm Profit programme. So I think with all that information combined, we need to get that message out, and that will enable farmers to get that message out as well about the positive contribution that they're making.
Question number 2, Mary Fee.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on when it will publish its Good Food Nation Bill.
Fergus Ewing.
Work is underway to draft the bill, and we plan to publish it as part of the legislative programme set out in the programme for government for this parliamentary year.
Mary Fee.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer? We know that food bank use has soared in the last decade, and governments cannot rely on the goodwill of donations and volunteers to feed the poorest. What does the Cabinet Secretary envision the bill will do to tackle food poverty, and will the bill include a statutory right to food?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, I think the member does raise a very important point about consequences, sadly, of the policies of austerity pursued by the London government for far too long. It's important to say that this government and my government colleagues have done a huge amount of things to try to ameliorate the poverty, sadly, which has been resultant from this period of austerity. And therefore, for example, in 2018-19, we invested over £1.4 billion in targeted support for low-income households, including over £100 million to mitigate the worst impact of UK welfare cuts. And we've increased our Fair Food Fund to £3.5 million this year to provide continued support. As to the question of a right to food, our consultation did not recommend inclusion of a right to food, but proposed that Scottish ministers should have regard to international obligations, which are wider than just the right to food, when developing statements of policy on food. Obviously, we look forward to publication of the bill in due course.
If we could keep supplementaries short, please. I have one from Stuart McMillan.
Presiding officer, to ask the Cabinet Secretary if he can tell me how he's supporting local authorities' environmental health departments at a time when the number of plant-based, vegan food outlets and food and drink producers are increasing.
Fergus Ewing.
Well, we do a wide range of work with local authorities. For example, we have the Food for Life programme, where we're working with many local authorities, encouraging them to provide fresh local food and locally procured food. And many local authorities are doing a terrific job. Indeed, I visited Crown Primary School in my own constituency, where they provide a wide variety of nutritious meals, obviously including fruit and vegetables, to the pupils, and they also use a local butcher to supply a very large number of schools. That's the sort of work that I think stands Scotland's children in good stead.
Question number 3, Angus MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it's taking to provide full DNA traceability to the Scotch beef brand.
Fergus Ewing.
The Scottish Government Knowledge Transfer and Innovation Fund has recently awarded Quality Meat Scotland almost £100,000 in grant funding for a project looking at Scotch beef PGI traceability.
Angus MacDonald.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his reply. Clearly, there will be a benefit to our world-class beef industry from a DNA traceability system, which will take the existing quality assurance and brands integrity measures currently in place to a new level. However, does the Cabinet Secretary share my concerns following the passing of the UK Government's Agriculture Bill's second reading last Monday, which attempts to grab key powers from the Scottish Parliament on farming and food production, that the Tories have shown their true colours with an Agriculture Bill set to grab devolved powers and a negotiating approach that would see a trade deal with Donald Trump undermine world-renowned Scottish produce, including our world-class Scotch beef and lamb?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, I think Mr MacDonald raises a point which is of concern not only to farmers on this side of the border, but to farmers throughout the UK. Indeed, I read of a demonstration planned by some farmers taking their case to Westminster. Let me be clear, the Scottish Government won't support any proposed future UK trade deals that would not only undermine our own high-quality regulatory standards, but would also lead consumers unwittingly to purchase products that are produced to a lower welfare standard. I made this position clear to UK ministers. Myself and Rosanna Cunningham will make that clear once again at the forthcoming next interministerial meeting on the 17th of February. What is really sad is that the UK just haven't given any clarity on this topic at all. Indeed, I understand that Mr Conor Burns, in an exchange with Ivan McKee, indicated he did expect there to be reciprocal trade in agricultural products, and it seems pretty clear to anyone that the President of the United States will be determined to get his agricultural produce into the UK market.
Question number 4 has been withdrawn. Question number 5, Peter Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it plans to support the GrassTech project, which aims to develop existing livestock farming technology to monitor and reduce methane production.
Fergus Ewing.
GrassTech is a cross-Europe collaborative project tackling the issue of methane emissions from livestock, a topic of interest for both the Scottish Government and Scottish agriculture. The Scottish Government currently invests £7.2 million annually in longer-term agricultural and rural research at Scotland's Rural College, and this investment also underpins their success in securing the £250,000 grants provided by DEFRA for GrassTech. Scottish Government officials will work with DEFRA to ensure the results of the project are used to help inform our future policy in this area.
Peter Chapman.
I thank the Minister for that answer, and I declare an interest as a partner in the farming business. The GrassTech project aims to develop an accurate way of measuring methane produced by livestock being reared outside on grass. 90% of Scotland's cattle are outdoors for a significant amount of the year, and hopefully this project will identify sensible and practical measures the farming industry can use in order to continue its already substantial efforts in the fight against climate change. I also hope this project will bring hard facts and dispel some of the myths that have been circulating regarding the farming sector's effect on the environment. So can the Minister outline what measures the Scottish Government is taking to further support farmers in their fight against climate change, and what it intends to do to challenge some of the dishonesties circulated regarding the industry's effect on the environment?
Ferguson.
Well, we're doing a number of things there, Nent. Firstly, I particularly welcome the range of activity, including Quality Meat Scotland's Better Grazing project, which works with livestock farmers across Scotland. I've also mentioned the substantial support to SRUC. I've also had the opportunity to discuss with farmers as a monitor farm work being done to improve qualities of grass. I've also seen improved agronomy techniques in minimising the use of fertiliser. We will be bringing forward more details of plans further to encourage sustainable and low-carbon farming very soon. And I'm very pleased that this appears to be a topic upon which members across the Chamber share an approach to ensure that not only are our farmers producing some of the highest quality meat in the world, but they're also doing that in a way that it is friendly to the planet and sustainable. And I'm very pleased that this is something that meets with approval across the Chamber.
Short supplementary, please, from Emma Harper.
The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that there are many farmers and crofters already shifting to a grass-fed approach for the livestock, as it is more sustainable and efficient. Can he outline how the Scottish Government is further supporting this activity?
Ferguson.
Well, as Emma Harper rightly says, our livestock farmers play a key role in protecting our permanent grassland and the historic carbon sinks that are stored beneath it. We want all farmers and crofters to make best use of their grasslands, produce high-quality food, improve sustainability and help achieve our long-term climate environmental targets. There's a lot more I can say, Presiding Officer, but as you know, I always try to be brief.
Yes, please don't. Question number 6, Gordon MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government what impact the UK Government's proposed immigration controls could have on Scotland's food and drink sector.
Ben Macpherson.
Current UK immigration policy does not recognise the needs of Scotland's key industries. As James Withers, CEO of Scotland Food and Drink, has stressed, the food and drink sector employs 40,000 EU nationals, with a further 46,000 roles needing filled by 2030. The UK Government's proposals will restrict labour market access, and could leave many of these roles in one of Scotland's critical industries unfulfilled. Our proposals for a Scottish visa would allow Scottish ministers accountable to this Scottish Parliament to develop a tailored migration policy within the UK immigration system to meet Scotland's needs.
Gordon MacDonald.
I thank the Minister for that answer. The Minister will be aware that many EU citizens living and working in Scotland are employed in food and drink sector, including at Burton's Biscuits in my constituency. Does he agree that instead of putting up restrictive barriers to our valued EU citizens staying in Scotland, the UK should drop the settled status scheme and introduce a system based on declaration of proof of status?
Ben Macpherson.
The Scottish Government has consistently sought to be constructive and solution-focused to the clear deficiencies within the UK Government's approach to the rights of EU citizens. And we have long argued that in place of the EU settlement scheme, the UK Government should instead adopt a declaratory system with the option of physical proof for those who desire it. This would avoid the need for people to make applications and remove the threat of refusal, except in the most extreme circumstances. As things stand within the current scenario, we are also supporting EU citizens across Scotland to stay in Scotland, because that's what we want, and have provided significant resource, including to Citizens Advice Scotland, to support them in this. And I am grateful for all of those who are helping to support our EU citizens to stay in Scotland, and encourage more and more employers and indeed MSPs to get behind that effort.
Question number 8, Keith Brown.
To ask the Scottish Government how its proposed Scottish visa could impact on the rural economy.
Ben Macpherson.
The current migration system is not working for our rural communities, And both the Scottish Visa and Rural Migration pilot schemes, in line with the recommendation from the Migration Advisory Committee, could have a significant positive impact on the growth and sustainability of our rural economy. These measures would allow Scotland to attract and, crucially, retain people with the skills and attributes we need for our communities to flourish. The UK Government should engage positively and work with us to develop these pilots and trial them in Scotland to encourage people to move to and stay in our rural communities.
Keith Brown.
Answer, and also ask whether he shares my concerns about reports from a recruitment agency based in my constituency which specialises in sourcing staff from Europe for the rural hospitality sector where there is limited local seasonal labour, that in a recent recruitment drive, instead of the usual 40+ applicants, only 3 people applied for positions. Does he agree with the UK's Migration Advisory Committee recommendation that the UK should pilot tailored approaches for our rural areas, and will he make a request for Scotland to host such pilots to address labour shortages in areas like the rural hospitality industry?
Ben Macpherson.
I very much share Keith Brown's concerns, and the example he cites is one which shows that the fact that we have now left the EU makes us less attractive, unfortunately, for migrant workers, and also we are having to compete with other EU countries who wish to attract the same individuals to work in their economies. As Keith Brown has said, and I mentioned in my last answer, pilots should be hosted here in Scotland, and we are continue to engage with UK ministers and the Home Office on that they should bring those pilots to Scotland. We have said that consistently since the previous Home Secretary mentioned it on the 23rd of July 2019, and we will continue to engage with UK Government to press them to do this thing, to undertake these pilots, which will be the benefit of all of Scotland.
Question number 7, Ruth Maguire.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it's taking to support environmentally sustainable farming practices.
Marie Goujon.
The support provided to farmers, crofters and land managers clearly contributes to environmentally sustainable farming practices. Those receiving funding as direct payments must adhere to agricultural practices beneficial for the climate and the environment. Our Agri-Environment Climate Scheme has successfully funded a range of activities that help to maintain and enhance our rich and varied natural environment, with almost 1 million hectares of land under environmental management. And our new agricultural transformation programme will encompass the now statutory commitments on whole farm emissions accounting, sustainability, innovation and an agricultural modernisation fund in line with the climate emergency.
Ruth Maguire.
Thank the Minister for that very full answer. The Minister will be aware that several times now Boris Johnson has made clear he intends to allow GM crops to be grown in England. Can the Minister advise what consultation there's been with the Scottish Government on this, and could she provide reassurance to concerned citizens on the Scottish Government's position on GM crop cultivation?
Marie Goujon.
I can quite simply say the UK Government has not consulted with the Scottish Government on this. However, I would say in addition to that, that this is a devolved matter, and I can categorically say our position on GM has not changed. We've brought in domestic legislation that aligns with EU law and allows us to maintain our opt-out of GM crop cultivation, and we would urge the UK Government to continue to align with EU standards on GM in the future.
Short, quick supplementary, please, from Colin Smith.
A new agricultural support system will be key to support an environmentally sustainable farming, and it's important that the transition period is used to prepare for this. So can the Minister tell us when the Government will bring forward details on how the pilot schemes to develop that new system will be funded, and is it still the intention to cap direct payments to fund those pilots?
A shorter and quicker answer, please, from Marie Goujon.
I can just say that I'd be happy to get back to the member with more detail on that, but I would say that there is already one pilot underway with SNH, and again, I'll get back to him with further detail on how we plan to take that forward.
That concludes portfolio questions, and we'll move on to the next item of business. If everyone could shift their seats accordingly.
Thank you. The next item of business is a statement by Kate Forbes on the Scottish Budget for 2020-2021. The Minister will take questions at the end of her statement. I would encourage those members who wish to ask a question to press their request to speak buttons. And I call on Kate Forbes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today I present the Scottish Budget for 2020-21. This is a budget that offers vision and leadership at a crucial moment for our country. Last week, the UK formally left the European Union and entered the transition period that is intended to last until December. This was not an outcome of Scotland's choosing, but until Scotland has the opportunity to choose a different path, we must deliver the best possible outcome for the people we represent. This budget provides an early opportunity for us to do that. It sets out a bold and ambitious programme which we believe will have widespread public support and, as a result, should command the support of this chamber. We will confirm today significant investment in our response to the global climate emergency, to strengthen our economy and to improve our public services. Because this is a budget that has well-being and fairness at its very heart. It's a progressive budget, and it will provide extra help to those who need it most, tackling inequalities and poverty, especially child poverty. Our well-being approach to the budget prioritises actions that have the greatest impact on improving lives across Scotland now and creating the conditions that are required to ensure well-being for future generations. But it is also a budget presented in the context of the UK Government's decision to defer its budget last November. This has obliged us to make significant changes to this year's budget process, and with support from the Finance Committee, we have a bespoke budget process this year. The late UK budget has required the Scottish Government to present tax and spending plans for Scotland without certainty about our fiscal position next year. The timetable agreed with the Finance Committee should see the budget bill passed on the 5th of March, the week before the UK budget on the 11th of March. We will have passed into law our spending plans, doing what we can to provide certainty and stability on behalf of the people of Scotland. But the financial and economic risk will not end there. The UK budget will still present a significant risk to the Scottish budget. This budget contains our best estimate minimum level of funding that will be available to the Scottish Government in 2020-21. However, updated economic forecasts and block grant adjustments will only be available when the UK budget is published. That requires the Scottish Government to use provisional forecasts as the basis for setting budgets, in line with the up-to-date forecasts of devolved tax income and social security expenditure undertaken by the Scottish Fiscal Commission. We've had to make assumptions about the Barnett consequentials that will be added to the Scottish bloc as a result of the UK budget. And we've had to take decisions about devolved tax policy without knowledge of future UK policy. That position is not one of our choosing. It creates unnecessary challenges for public bodies, for businesses and for taxpayers right across Scotland. The current timetable provides for royal assent by the 30th of March. Delaying the Scottish budget further would have undermined parliamentary scrutiny, increasing the risk that we would run out of time to pass the budget bill. Such an outcome would be in nobody's interest. Today's budget aims to provide as much certainty as possible to taxpayers and to public bodies, above all to local authorities who urgently need to set their own budgets for the year ahead. It's hoped that all of Parliament will unite behind these tax and spending plans. The Scottish Government is, of course, open to discussion with all parties about how we best achieve that, but the clock is ticking. A focus on fairness and our collective well-being underpins the measures we are taking to drive and inclusive economy, to tackle poverty and to respond to climate change through a just transition. It also drives our approach to Scottish public services. This budget will protect and improve these services as part of our strong social contract with the people of Scotland. In total, Presiding Officer, this budget provides for the first time ever funding of more than £15 billion for our health and care services. We are providing the capital for our programme of elective care centres. We're investing more than £9.4 billion in health and social care partnerships, and we're investing £117 million in mental health. We're delivering an increase of nearly 60% in funding to reduce harm from alcohol and drugs, including support for the work of the new Drugs Deaths Task Force. We're also providing a real terms increase in local government revenue support as part of an overall funding package that delivers our key commitment on early learning and childcare, that funds a fair pay deal for our teachers, and invests more than £120 million targeted at closing the attainment gap, with a further £62 million provided out with the settlement through the Attainment Scotland Fund. And to help maintain low levels of reported crime and keep our communities safe, we are providing an additional £37 million for the Scottish Police Authority resource budget. That is well above the real terms increase we had promised and will ensure Police Scotland have the money they require to maintain officer numbers at current levels. That is coupled with an extra £6.5 million for community justice interventions as part of our efforts to reduce re-offending rates. The budget provides capital funding of nearly £70 million for the prisons estate, including a replacement for HMP Barlinnie and investment in the female estate. Now, Presiding Officer, the budget and the economy are, of course, inextricably linked, and both are being impacted by EU exit. Last week, the Bank of England downgraded its projections for the UK economy. The Scottish Fiscal Commission forecasts for the Scottish economy published today again confirm that not only has uncertainty around leaving the EU already held back growth over recent years, but that EU exit will continue to be bad for our economy, holding back growth in trade and productivity. But despite those challenging economic conditions, the economy continues to grow. A strong labour market with high employment and low unemployment, with earnings growth that is outperforming previous forecasts. However, we must remember that the economic and fiscal forecasts that underpin this budget assume that a sensible agreement will be reached between the EU and the UK. Should that not be the case, we may be forced to reconsider spending plans across all portfolios in order to mitigate, as much as we can, the unnecessary harm that would be caused if no agreement is reached. The economic outlook has informed the progressive approach taken in this budget to tax. We have already the most progressive, fair and balanced income tax system in the UK, one that raises additional revenue from those who can most afford it and protects public spending. This helps us to make Scotland the kind of country that we want it to be. It funds our public services, supports our economic infrastructure and helps those most in need. In 2017, in the interests of providing certainty, the Scottish Government made a commitment that Scotland's income tax structure was settled for at least the duration of this Parliament. And, Presiding Officer, today we are keeping that promise. There will be no increase to any of the rates of income tax this year. No Scottish income taxpayer will pay more income tax in 2020-21 on their current income than they do this year. To cement the progressivity of our tax system, we will increase the basic and intermediate rate thresholds by inflation to protect our lowest and middle earning taxpayers. The higher and top rate thresholds will be frozen. That will ensure that 56% of Scottish taxpayers pay less than they would if they lived elsewhere in the UK. Scotland will continue to be the lowest tax part of the UK for the majority of income taxpayers. The Independent Scottish Fiscal Commission has forecast that our decision to freeze the higher rate threshold will raise an additional £51 million in 2020-21 compared to an assumed inflationary increase. The Commission's forecasts show that, in total, Scottish income tax will raise over £12 billion in 2020-21, partly driven by continued growth in earnings. On land and buildings transaction tax, we're proposing to introduce a new 2% band for non-residential leases only, applying to transactions where the net present value of rental income over the period of the lease is above £2 million. The move to a three-band structure will ensure that our tax system continues to be seen as progressive and fair in keeping with the Scottish approach to taxation. Legislation will be introduced to the Scottish Parliament to enable this change to come into effect from the 7th of February 2020. But it will not apply if the contract for a transaction was entered into prior to the 6th of February 2020. There will be no further changes to LBTT, providing certainty to taxpayers purchasing land and property. We will be using the resources raised through the tax decisions in this budget to support our public services and meet our ambitious targets on child poverty, including through initiatives such as the Scottish Child Payment. This government believes that that is the right decision for Scotland. Based on previous commitments at the UK Autumn Budget 2018, we do not expect income tax divergence between Scotland and the rest of the UK to increase in 2020-21. But if there is any divergence, Presiding Officer, it will not be because of decisions made here. It will be because the UK Government is yet again cutting taxes for high earners. Presiding Officer, I'll now turn to the further spending commitments announced in this budget. Last year, the First Minister led the way in acknowledging the climate emergency. Across the world, we are seeing an increasingly unified response to what is a fundamental issue for us all and for future generations. We promised this would be a budget that steps up the delivery of our ambition to tackle climate change. And, Presiding Officer, today we deliver on that promise. Scotland's transition to net zero emissions is a national endeavour, and changes are needed across the whole of society. We all share in the opportunities that this will bring through our commitment to delivering a Green New Deal and securing a just transition. This budget confirms that the Scottish Government will play its part, guided by the expert advice provided by the Committee on Climate Change and the Climate Emergency Response Group. I can therefore announce that we are meeting our pledge to increase the proportion of investment directed towards low-carbon infrastructure each year, with £1.8 billion of capital investment in specific projects to reduce emissions. That is an increase in low-carbon investment of over £500 million compared with last year. The budget provides additional funding in the key areas of transport, agriculture, heat and energy. Promoting a greater shift to public transport will be key to our success. We are increasing overall funding for rail and bus services, including concessionary travel, by £286 million to a total of £1.55 billion in 2020-21. Investment in active travel will increase to over £85 million, promoting cycling, walking and more sustainable transport. The £83 million Future Transport Fund will see us investing in low-carbon and other transformational initiatives, including low-emission and electric buses, bus prioritisation, electric vehicle charging points infrastructure and the Switched On Towns and Cities programme. We're providing £5 million to help the shift to electric vehicles in the justice sector, and we are increasing to £35 million low-carbon transport loan fund, supporting those who need support to drive to transition to low-emission vehicles. Emissions from agriculture and other land uses need to reduce as part of our climate plan. But we need to work in partnership with farmers and other land managers to achieve that. We're providing an initial £40 million investment in the Agricultural Transformation Programme to help develop the tools and the techniques that are needed. We're also increasing our investment in forestry to over £64 million in 2020-21, up from £59 million, as part of our response to the recommendation made by the Committee on Climate Change that we need to move towards planting levels of 15,000 hectares per year as soon as we can. And we confirmed today a new £120 million heat transition deal, which recognises the need to boost the scale and pace of growth in decarbonising our homes and buildings. That will ensure we seize the huge economic opportunity renewable heat will present as part of a just transition, delivering thousands of new green jobs. This heat deal includes a £50 million Heat Networks Early Adopter Challenge Fund for local authorities and a £10 million fund to support hydrogen heat demonstrator projects. This budget also secures an increase in capital funding for energy efficiency measures to £151 million. These measures alone represent a substantial plan of action for the year ahead, but we must and we will go further. The climate emergency demands immediate action, but it also requires genuine long-term commitment if we are to deliver against our statutory emissions reductions targets. I have three further announcements to make which underline the depth of this government's longer-term commitment. Firstly, we will incentivise local authorities to use the assets and the levers at their disposal to reduce emissions and boost the economy by unlocking up to £200 million of revenue-financed investment in projects across Scotland through our Green Growth Accelerator. Secondly, we commit now that we will ring-fence an additional £2 billion of transformational infrastructure investment over the next parliamentary term for measures to support the delivery of the climate change plan. Let nobody doubt that this government will prioritise multi-year investment in low-carbon measures at the scale required to help tackle the climate emergency. These measures will build on the recommendations of the Infrastructure Commission, with further detail to be provided in the Infrastructure Investment Plan later this year. Finally, Presiding Officer, all the evidence suggests that one of the most effective ways of locking in carbon is to restore our peatland. This offers a clear nature-based solution to the climate crisis. The Committee on Climate Change have shown that every £1 spent on peatland restoration brings £4 of social benefit through reduced emissions, improved water quality and flood mitigation. Not only will we increase investment in peatland restoration to £20 million next year, an increase of £6 million compared to this year, we will go further. Today, this government is committing to invest more than £250 million in peatland restoration over the next 10 years. That will enable large-scale restoration projects to be developed, enhancing biodiversity in some of the most important habitats in Europe, securing jobs in the rural economy and, based on initial estimates, delivering greenhouse gas emission reductions of up to 0.8 million tonnes a year by 2032. The move to net zero will have many impacts, including on our economy, as consumption patterns change and ways of doing business adapt. There will be challenges, but there are also new opportunities. This government is committed to helping Scotland's economy adjust at a time when we must also work hard to mitigate the impacts of EU exit, drive productivity and ensure we are globally competitive. Infrastructure investment remains key to our success. Overall, today's budget, backed with increased capital borrowing, will boost infrastructure investment by nearly £1 billion in the first year of our national infrastructure mission, which is to increase annual investment between 2019-20 and 2025-26 by 1% of GDP. That includes further investment in sustainable transport and digital through the R100 programme and more than £800 million of investment in affordable housing as we continue to progress our target of 50,000 affordable homes. This coming year will also bring important progress in our network of support for Scotland's businesses. We're establishing the Scottish National Investment Bank with £220 million of direct investment in 2020-21 by the Scottish Government, and the South of Scotland Enterprise will receive £28 million of funding to provide targeted support for businesses there. Our approach will reach right across Scotland as we provide £201 million of funding for city, region and growth deals, including provision for new deals in Stirling and Clackmannanshire, Tay Cities, Ayrshire and the Borderlands. We are pleased to maintain the most competitive business rates regime in the UK, with the lowest poundage anywhere in the UK, and we will implement a new lower intermediate property rate for properties with a rateable value of between £51,000 and £95,000. Taken together, those decisions will have the number of properties liable for the higher property rate and ensure that over 95% of properties pay a lower poundage than they would in other parts of the UK. The budget maintains a generous package of reliefs benefiting over 150,000 properties, including the Small Business Bonus Scheme and Business Growth Accelerator, reliefs which are worth an estimated £744 million in 2020-21. Presiding Officer, we are pleased that sense has prevailed and Parliament has supported the Scottish Government, the business community and COSLA in approving the Non-Domestic Rates Bill, which delivers on our agreed measures from the Barclay Review. This bill supports growth, it improves the administration of the system and it increases fairness for ratepayers. This budget delivers a range of other measures that will support growth in our economy. We're providing an additional £16 million of support for the National Manufacturing Institute, and we are increasing the trade and the investment budget by a quarter. We're also investing in the fundamentals of our future economy with increased resources for Skills Development Scotland and real terms increases for our world-class universities and colleges, with total investment of more than £2 billion, helping to ensure that we have the skills and research base that our economy needs. In total, this budget provides a multi-billion-pound package of support for the economy, using all the levers at our disposal just when it needs it the most. Presiding Officer, at a time when the UK Government seems to have cast our economy aside in favour of Brexit, this Government will work tirelessly to bring certainty and inclusive growth to the economy of Scotland. Presiding Officer, we must also build a well-being economy, one that values growth but which also strives to be inclusive and fair. We know that challenges in our economy often have the hardest impact on those who are already vulnerable. And that's why we're announcing a progressive budget which targets support at those on lower incomes and in most need of support. It's also one of the reasons that we fought hard to win greater control over social security. This coming year will be truly transformational for two reasons. Firstly, we will see an uplift of nearly £3 billion in the total value of social security expenditure under our control as we administer the attendance allowance, disability living allowance, industrial injuries disablement allowance, personal independence payment and severe disablement allowance for the first time. And secondly, we will provide £21 million of funding for the game-changing new Scottish Child payment of £10 per week, with initial rollout commencing later this year. It is estimated that at full rollout in 2022, this will lift 30,000 children out of poverty. Presiding Officer, when powers rest in Scotland's hands and not in Westminster's control, we will use them wisely and decisively to build a fairer country. We're also providing wider support to tackle poverty and to help progress towards the target to halve child poverty by 2030. We'll continue to invest from the £50 million Tackling Child Poverty Fund, and will increase the Scottish Welfare Fund by over 7% to provide more support to those hit by Tory welfare cuts. Through our public sector pay policy, we'll provide a 3% increase in basic pay for those earning up to £80,000, with additional support to those on lower incomes through an underpin of £750 for those earning £25,000 or less. And we will continue to pay and promote the real living wage. We'll provide additional funding to help the most disadvantaged access further and higher education, and we will invest £645 million in our radical expansion of early learning and childcare, providing from August this year 1140 hours of high-quality childcare that will boost the education of children at a crucial time in their development and also reduce the financial burden of childcare costs on young families. In total, based on previous estimates, we expect to spend no less than £1.4 billion in 2020-21 on supporting low-income households before taking into account the remaining devolution of social security benefits. The impacts of austerity continue to be felt, and we face an uncertain future due to Brexit. But rest assured, Presiding Officer, this government can be relied upon to act with compassion, investing in the fairer and more equal society all of us would like to see. Presiding Officer, in a parliament of minorities, good governance demands compromise and pragmatism on all sides. This is a budget that speaks to the priorities of the country. I'm sure every party can find a reason to agree with it, but those who wish to find partisan reasons to oppose it should understand the devastating consequences of doing so. The emergency provisions enshrined in the Scotland Act are wholly inadequate for the Parliament of a modern economy. If no budget is passed, the law mandates that public expenditure is capped at the level of the previous year. No £1 billion increase to our health and care services, or the additional £500 million for local authorities and our police and universities and colleges would all be denied a real terms increase in their budgets. But worst of all, as a consequence of the further devolution of social security payments, nearly £3 billion of vital support will be denied to those in our society who need it the most. Now is not the time for brinkmanship. At a time when Westminster is far from representing Scotland's interests, it's time for Holyrood to demonstrate clearly and with purpose that we are willing and able to act in the national interest. And in order to achieve that, the government will be willing to compromise, but we want to be clear on the parameters of that compromise. This is a budget that fully allocates the resources at our disposal and addresses the priorities of the nation. It reflects our ambition for our country, our determination to eliminate child poverty, to accelerate the the transition to a net zero economy and improve the collective well-being of our society through first-class public services and a social security system built with human dignity at its core. In doing so, we have used every fiscal lever we have to the fullest extent. Every penny is accounted for, including the £100 million in the reserve, held to ensure we can manage future tax reconciliations and any volatility in social security expenditure. If any party in this chamber wants to see spending increases or tax cuts, or in some cases both, they will need to be clear with the Scottish people, not just about what they want, but how it will be paid for. In presenting its budget to you today, the Scottish Government has made an assessment of the promises made to the people of Scotland by the UK Government, and this budget relies on them fulfilling their commitments. We have had little choice but to take the Tories' promises at face value. Their majority at Westminster is, after all, won on the back of a promise to end austerity. But we have heard those promises before, and yet the crippling reality of Tory austerity continues to bite. And just last week, there was widespread reports that all UK government departments were being ordered to identify savings of 5%, an order issued by none other than Boris Johnson and Sajid Javid. It seems that old habits die hard for the Tories. If the UK government does not live up to its promises, we will have to take the unprecedented step of returning to this chamber with budget revisions that make cuts to the spending plans that I have outlined today. If that happens, the responsibility will lie clearly at the door of the UK government. Presiding Officer, as a Parliament, we face a choice. Time is of the essence and we must choose soon. We propose a budget that delivers for our public services, that invests in the path to net zero emissions, that boosts our economy, and through the new child payment, delivers a game changer in the fight against child poverty. This Scottish Government's choice is clear. This budget delivers for the people of Scotland, and I commend it to the Chamber.
Thank you very much. And the Minister will now take questions on the budget statement. Murdo Fraser to be followed by Rhoda Grant. Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I start by thanking the Minister for advance sight of her statement? And can I congratulate her on her delivery of it this afternoon in circumstances none of us wanted to see. As an aside, I believe this is the first time the Scottish budget has been delivered by a woman and by an English qualified chartered accountant. Presiding Officer, the backdrop to this budget is a substantial increase in the block grant thanks to extra spending at Westminster. The Scottish Government is benefiting from a Boris bonus worth at least £1.1 billion in real terms. And what is essential is that this money is not squandered but used to the benefit of the Scottish people. And against that budget increase, there can be no case for additional tax rises or for any further cuts in our vital frontline services. Presiding Officer, our priorities for this budget are to see measures to help grow the Scottish economy and to support vital public services. When it comes to tax, we have been very clear that there must be no further divergence between Scottish personal taxation and that payable elsewhere in the United Kingdom. And what the Minister announced today on tax thresholds will widen the tax differential, and that's not something that we could support. Because what we know, thanks to the Fraser of Allender Institute, is that the tax changes introduced by the former Finance Secretary, egged on by the Greens, making Scotland the highest tax part of the United Kingdom, haven't actually raised any additional revenue for the Scottish public services. All they have done is fill the black hole that's been created by the fact that the Scottish economy is growing more slowly than the rest of the UK under the SNP's stewardship. Presiding Officer, we know that over the past year, the Scottish economy has grown at less than half the UK rate, and I expect the Fiscal Commission will tell us today that that trend is continuing. So no additional taxes would be appropriate. And that is why in this budget we need to see action to support business. The announcement on reducing the large business supplement is welcome, but doesn't go far enough for us or indeed for business, particularly large retail, which is suffering at the moment. Presiding Officer, we welcome the extra money for health, only made possible because of additional spending by the UK government. And when it comes to local government, which has borne the brunt of cuts in previous budgets, we've been very clear that that cannot be the case this year. Councils are key to initiatives to tackle climate change, but when their budgets are cut, they cannot progress those. So we will scrutinise very closely the additional commitments put upon councils to ensure they are fully funded with no hidden cuts to the core grant as in previous years. Presiding Officer, I have two specific questions to ask the Finance Minister. Firstly, she has told us that every penny at her disposal is accounted for. Of course, we heard that exact line year on year from her former boss, but miraculously, in the 3 to 4 weeks after producing his budget, he would suddenly find a few £100 million extra down the back of his sofa to lubricate his budget negotiations. So perhaps the Finance Minister can save us all a bit of time by telling us today exactly how much money is hidden away, in addition to what's in the budget before us. That would make forward budget discussions much easier, because we will give this budget serious consideration, and we are prepared to engage seriously with the Scottish Government as to whether this budget is something we can support. And finally, Presiding Officer, would the Finance Minister accept that all the additional spending in Scotland benefits from is supported by the union dividend, now worth nearly £2,000 for every man, woman and child in Scotland? Without this, we learnt this week, Scotland would be facing a deficit of over £10 billion, now up to 7.3% of GDP. Will she acknowledge that it is Scotland's place in the United Kingdom, coupled with this year's Boris bonus, that supports this budget and public services in Scotland?
Thank you. Minister Kay Forbes.
Rather than pretending that there's a Boris bonus, I think the Tories should be starting off by apologising for the decade of austerity that they've subjected this country to. The Tories talk about extra money. We have not seen a single penny of that. And if the UK Government was so confident of investing more in the Scottish Government's budget, why have they introduced so much uncertainty by delaying that very budget? In terms of taxation, Murdo Fraser knows that his position on tax is not sustainable. For the majority of people, this is the lowest tax part of the UK, but for everybody, it is the fairest. And the reason that we can invest in our public services is because the fundamentals of our economy are strong and because we have mitigated the impact of Tory austerity with our tax decisions. Now, in terms of the two questions that Murdo Fraser asked, I can confirm that every penny has been deployed. The uncertainty caused by the UK Government's budget delay means that we are not playing games. This is not the time for brinkmanship, and we have deployed every penny on the face of the bill. This is an honest presentation of what the Scottish Government believes the priorities should be for the people of Scotland. And in terms of the union dividend, if the union dividend is austerity for 10 years that's hit our public services and a Brexit that we didn't vote for that's hit our economy, then I'm not sure that's a great selling point for the union dividend.
Rhoda Grant, to be followed by Patrick Harvey. Rhoda Grant.
Firstly, I'd like to welcome Kate Forbes to her role in delivering the budget statement today and thank her for a prior copy of the statement. Presiding Officer, despite additional powers and financial levers that have come to the Scottish Parliament over the last decade, the SNP government have failed to maximise their use, leaving our country, our people and our essential services worse off. They have endeavoured to hide that through smoke and mirrors, and that is the case again today. They tried to avoid scrutiny, but they must come clean with the people of Scotland and tell them what choices they are making on their behalf. Scottish Labour wants transformational change. We want investment in the future. We know that we cannot reverse 13 years of mismanagement in one budget. So, acknowledging that, we have asked the Scottish Government in this year's budget to take a step in the right direction, to take a step towards real change. We have asked that they invest in the future by tackling climate change and prioritising getting our young people onto buses. Scottish Labour delivered free bus travel that was transformational for older people. We must now do the same for our younger people, under 25s, giving them the choice that will follow them into adulthood. and it will benefit the whole country by encouraging everyone out of their cars and onto public transport. Scottish Labour are also sick of hearing about people being trapped in hospital when they should be at home, and it's costing a fortune and holding people hostage. We want to see a step change in local government funding to allow them to invest in the services that people need to help them escape from hospital and into the comfort of their own homes. We want to boost the economy by investing in education and skills that our country needs, not only for young people, but for everyone, equipping them for the future of automation and digitisation. Our further and higher education used to lead the world. Let us aspire to be world leaders again. Let our communities thrive again. Let us push for excellence in health and social care services, and let us reverse austerity and change the future. Presiding Officer, this budget is a disappointment, and what's worse, it lets down the Scottish people. It's a time for investment. Can the Minister please tell me exactly how their spending plans will meet our ambitions to invest in the future for all of Scotland? Will it actually tackle climate change? Will it allow young people freedom and independence to go to work and play? Will it educate young people and a workforce for the challenges ahead? And will it equip our councils to protect our communities? And will it once and for all put an end to delayed discharge?
Minister.
Rhoda Grant for that question. What's disappointing is that last year, for a party that claims to be about mitigating austerity, the Labour Party voted against a budget last year that contained £1.4 billion directly linked to mitigating austerity for our most vulnerable, including measures that directly mitigated UK welfare decisions. And in this year's budget, the Labour Party have a choice. Will they vote for or against a commitment in this year's budget to deliver the first child payments that will, by 2022, take 30,000 children out of poverty? That is the choice that Labour faces. I'm proud to be presenting this budget today because it's a budget that delivers in the national interest. It's a budget that delivers an additional £1 billion for health, an additional £500 million for local government, and real terms increases for colleges and universities. The question for Labour is, if they have good ideas, and I'm willing to listen and to compromise, whether they tell us how much it will cost, and if it costs more than the overall allocation that we have, what they will cut in order to deliver it.
Patrick Harvey, to be followed by Willie Rennie. Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Kate Forbes is taking on a difficult task, stepping into the breach to lead a budget process on a very short timescale and with no Finance Secretary in the Cabinet. All political parties have a responsibility to be constructive in that process, but Kate Forbes is also going to have to be constructive with us in trying to build the political agreement that hasn't been built prior to the introduction of the budget. There is much talk of the climate emergency in the document and in Kate Forbes' statement to Parliament. And the area where Scotland is clearly failing on climate is transport, where emissions are going up, not down, and that's largely due to long-standing government policies. And yesterday's transport strategy contained little sign of the substantial changes that are needed if we're going to get the progress that we need to see. In the budget, I can find no evidence of a shift away from the damaging, traffic-inducing transport projects that the government has been supporting up until now. Making that kind of shift would free up the resources that are necessary to invest in reversing the decades-long trend toward ever more expensive public transport. And the widely supported policy that Greens have been advocating for months, and as have the Labour Party, of free bus travel for young people would be a substantial step in this direction. Presiding Officer, given the tight timescales involved, can Kate Forbes give a clear assurance that she will look with an open mind at all of those options which Greens and others are putting forward for transformational change, and that this budget is not presented on a take-it-or-leave-it basis?
Minister.
I thank Patrick Harvey for that question, and I'm very happy to confirm to the Chamber and to all parties that I will be very willing to be very constructive, and I hope that the same goes for them when it comes to engaging with the budget. I do believe that this budget recognises our responsibilities to tackle climate change, and it does deliver a climate budget. As of today, the government will be spending 1% of GDP in tackling climate change, just in terms of capital on infrastructure projects, which Patrick Harvey mentioned. And that doesn't include the additional measures that we are taking, including significant increases in resource expenditure on peatland and the Green Growth Accelerator. Now, we recognise that when it comes to low-carbon infrastructure, we want to see the proportion of spend on that going up and the proportion of spend on high-carbon infrastructure going down. We want to see that trend. We believe we've made a step change in this budget today, but as always, my door is open and I'm very happy to listen to all parties.
Thank you very much. Call Willie Rennie to be followed by Rona Mackay.
I want to thank the Minister for an advance copy of the statement. It does include measures that we support. But does she not think there should have been references to all the projects across Scotland that are overspent to the tune of hundreds of millions of pounds, including the AWPR, the Sick Kids Hospital, the ferries and the hospitals today in Aberdeen that we found out about? Councils have only been given half of what they need. Does she not accept that that will hit local services, including the promises that the government has made on their behalf? Now, forgive me for being a little bit sceptical, but ministers always say that they have no spare money when it comes to the budget negotiations before revealing secret pots of money. So forgive me for being sceptical about that. Does the budget allow for any spending on independence? But I agree with the Minister on Brexit, and we could agree with the Minister on this budget too, if the Minister clears the pathway to make that happen. Is that her objective?
Minister.
I sometimes worry that the Lib Dems are more obsessed with independence than I am. And in the last few budgets, the Lib Dems have prioritised the union over support for increased spend in mental health, in education, in infrastructure and in all of our other commitments. And the Lib Dems have a choice with this budget to actually get involved, participate and be willing to compromise, to work with us to deliver a budget. In terms of local government, we have provided a cash increase of almost £500 million to local authorities, and the settlement provides for our commitments on early learning and childcare, on teachers' pay and on pensions. So local authorities, in terms of real terms as well as cash increases, will see their resource budget going up. But if Willie Rennie believes strongly in a particular area of spend, then my door is open and I look forward to speaking to him.
Thank you very much. Now, all the parties have had their opening statements as well as questions, so a large number of members wish to ask questions. If we keep the questions concise, the answers concise, we'll get through all members. Rona Mackay to be followed by Dean Lockhart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the announcement that for the first time ever, health and social care partnerships will receive more than £9.4 billion, in spite of the fact that Scotland's annual budget fell in real terms by £1.5 billion over the last decade. Can the Minister expand on how that funding will be distributed?
Minister.
Well, our budget does prioritise investment in frontline services and takes funding for frontline NHS boards to £11.3 billion. And that sees additional investment of £454 million in our frontline boards, which is an increase of 4.2%, something I hope that all parties will welcome. And our budget, therefore, goes above and beyond the level of funding demand that we recognised in the medium-term financial framework. And through that approach, we will build on our record level of frontline health spending in Scotland, which is £136 per person higher than in England. And we'll deliver a shift in the balance of care towards mental health and to primary social and community care. Next year, we'll invest more than £9.4 billion in health and social care partnerships, and we'll also make an additional £12.7 million available to tackle the harm associated with the use of illicit drugs and alcohol.
Thank you. Jean Lockhart, to be followed by Alex Neil.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In her opening statement, the Minister said that if any party wants to see spending increases or tax cuts or both, they need to explain how they will be paid for. The answer is simple, Minister. We need to grow the economy and reverse the decline of the last 13 years. Yesterday, the SNP confirmed that the Scottish economy had grown 5% less in the last 13 years than the UK economy, and today the SFC is forecasting another 5 years of low growth and low wages in Scotland. Let's be clear, this is not about Brexit, because the rest of the UK is now growing more than twice the rate of Scotland. Presiding Officer, this is a piecemeal budget full of window dressing from a tired government. So let me ask the Minister, when will she start listening to us and take real action to restore economic growth to Scotland?
Minister.
Listening to the Tories would require me to do something impossible, which is to see tax cuts and spending increases, which is in accounting terms completely impossible. In terms of growing tax take and growing the economy, it's very clear in the evidence that we've seen, and certainly business is very clear as well, that the thing that's harming the economy right now is the uncertainty caused by Brexit. And the thing that would grow our economy fastest is being able to have the talent and the skills come into this country through population growth. Now, where do those levers lie? With Westminster, who are refusing to allow that to happen.
Alex Neil, to be followed by Sarah Boyack.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I first of all congratulate the Minister in her excellent delivery of the budget. And I'm not going to make any criticism. I'm just going to ask a simple question about a very specific matter. And it's to ask the Minister if she will look at the impact of water charges on small businesses and in particular review the policies and practices of Business Stream, who still insist on charging some small businesses for water they don't even use. And that's having an adverse impact on quite a number of small businesses up and down the length and breadth of Scotland.
Minister.
Well, I suppose briefly, I'm very happy to agree to consider the issues that Alex Neil has set out. As a government, we are committed to supporting our small businesses, which are the backbone of our economy.
Sarah Boyack, to be followed by Gillian Martin.
We know for 2020 to 21 that there are nearly £500 million of new Scottish Government commitments which our councils will have to deliver. Will the Minister guarantee that the Scottish Government will fully fund these new commitments in addition to the core budget and not at its expense? And will she tell us what new money is being allocated to local authorities to address the damaging impact of previous SNP budget cuts and the growing pressures our communities face?
Minister.
Well, I'm delighted to announce today that local government will get, in cash terms, almost £500 million to spend on delivering the services that the people of Scotland need and require. And the settlement, as I confirmed earlier, also provides for our commitments in early learning and childcare, teachers' pay and pensions. But as I've said before, and I'll say again, over the course of the next few weeks, with short time constraints, we have the opportunity to work collaboratively with any party in this place, and that includes the Labour Party. So if the Labour Party can be clear about what their priorities are and how they're going to cost them and fund them, then we're more than delighted to discuss those.
Gillian Martin, to be followed by Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As someone who represents a constituency where just transition away from high-carbon jobs is an acute challenge but a necessity, I welcome the announcement of the Green Growth Accelerator to support local authorities to invest in measures that will reduce emissions and support new green jobs. Will the Minister join me in urging all local authorities, but particularly those like Aberdeenshire Council, to bring forward proposals to ensure the potential of the Green Growth Accelerator is maximised?
Well, I agree with Gillian Martin that local authorities have a critical role to play in responding to the climate emergency. We need them to deploy the key levers that they have at their disposal, whether that's capital budgets or other resources. Their ownership of local land and assets and the responsibility in terms of local planning and regulatory frameworks is key in all of this. And as Gillian Martin said, the Green Growth Accelerator model is designed to support those local authorities to use those levers in concert with other local authorities and public sector partners to drive that transformative change that we want to see and we need to see.
Miles Briggs, to be followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I welcome the Minister to her position in what's probably going to be the longest job interview in history? But despite the biggest cash injection in the history of our NHS today, can I ask the Minister, why have the Scottish Government failed to end the underfunding of health boards, including her own in Highland, and failed to reverse cuts to rehab beds?
Minister.
Well, on the contrary, and I'm glad Miles Briggs has welcomed the record funding in health. I hope he continues that theme throughout the year in terms of welcoming this government's investment and prioritisation of the health service. But in terms of the two areas he mentioned, I note that the Tories have discussed at length the NRAC, and they've provided costings. I don't think those costings are strictly accurate unless he's going to cut other budgets as well to deliver that. And in terms of rehab beds, which is a really important issue, I believe when it comes to these very complex problems, we need complex solutions and we need new solutions. There's not a simple solution, but that's why we've increased by nearly 60% the funding that is going on reducing harm from alcohol and drugs. And that funding will be focused on supporting reduction in drug deaths to allow our new drug deaths task force to support innovative projects that work and also to test new approaches.
Kenneth Gibson, to be followed by Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome this well-presented budget and the feisty answering of questions so far. Can the Minister confirm that the rail services budget will increase by a thumping 27.3% to more than £1.25 billion, and that ferry services will see a 9.5% increase to £255.1 million, almost triple what it was when this government came to office, plus almost £50 million for Ferguson Marine?
I can confirm all of the above, and I'm particularly delighted as an MSP that represents a constituency that relies on our ferries to see that increase in support towards our lifeline ferry services.
Monica Lennon, to be followed by David Torrance.
Thank you. The Minister talked about the importance of governments keeping promises. This government promised to end delayed discharge, but that promise remains unfulfilled. Can the Minister confirm what assessment has been carried out of her spending plans to establish if they will fully meet the need that exists, and when government expects that we can see an end to delayed discharge?
Minister.
Well, as Monica Lennon will see from the increased spend throughout this budget, we are ensuring that there is an increase in frontline spend within our health service, in particular, to be able to deal with the challenging issues that she has identified. The Scottish budget continues to shift the balance of care, and we focus on our twin approaches of, yes, increased investment, but also of reform. And I know that the Cabinet Secretary for Health is doing a fantastic job in ensuring that's happening.
David Torrance, to be followed by Liz Smith.
Can the Minister confirm how much the Scottish Government is providing to support capitalisation of the Scottish National Investment Bank and how this will boost economic growth in Scotland?
Minister.
I can confirm in answer to the member that in order to continue our progress towards our commitment to provide £2 billion over 10 years to fund the National Investment Bank, we have in this year's budget the direct investment available of £220 million. And that's in addition to the existing £150 million Building Scotland Fund. The bank, and I know the bank enjoys cross-party support, will help support and positively impact on Scotland's economy through the provision of a mission-based investment, and will develop its own pipelines for investment to ensure that we're investing in the Scottish economy, not just for next year, but for generations to come.
Liz Smith, to be followed by John Mason.
Thank you. On page 120 of the budget book, the government states that it will maintain at least 116,000 full-time equivalent college places, but I can't see anything about the maintenance of part-time places, which are obviously so crucial to the economy. Could the Minister tell us any detail about what resources will be available for part-time college places?
Minister.
The figure relates to full-time equivalent. So in that sense, the budget continues to commit to funding college places. But I hope Liz Smith welcomes the commitment in this budget to deliver a real terms increase, both for higher education and for further education.
John Mason, to be followed by Claudia Beamish.
Thank you very much. I think I'm correct in saying that in 1920, the maximum limit that councils could increase council tax was 4.79%, and in fact only 12 councils took it to that level, so the average was 3.6. Can the Minister say what the equivalents are for this year?
If councils take up the full flexibility to increase their council tax levels by up to 3% in real terms next year, then that would generate an additional £135 million to support council services.
Claudia Beamish, to be followed by Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In light of the climate emergency, I welcome some commitments by the Scottish Government while needing reassurance, if not today. This is indeed new money. However, can the Minister tell us what methodology the Scottish Government has assessed this budget by, to be sure it is one that will deliver rapid and transformational change with just transition for Scotland across all portfolios, given that the results of the commissioned review on capital expenditure and emissions is not yet in place?
Minister.
I thank the member, and I think I remember giving evidence to her committee on this issue in terms of methodology and ensuring that our budget delivers our aspirations and ambitions on climate change. And she'll know that this builds on the 2019 Climate Change Act and also this year's programme for government to deliver on the elements that I mentioned in my opening remarks. But we are very proud of this budget in terms of a significant increase in investment in our climate change aspirations. But of course, in one sense, this is just the start. So whilst there's a significant investment, we look forward to continuing to build on that, not just this year, but through the years to come. And I think you see that most clearly when it comes to peatlands restoration, a commitment of £20 million this year, but a commitment for £250 million over the next period.
Stuart McMillan, to be followed by Adam Tompkins.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can the Minister provide a guarantee that the new budget line for Ferguson Marine in Port Glasgow will ensure it will safeguard jobs, protect the economy of my community, and that this budget line will be protected when she has discussions with the other parties in this chamber?
Minister.
Well, Stuart McMillan may see the 2021 Scottish budget includes almost £50 million to fund the delivery of vessels 801 and 802 in line with the revised schedule and the costs presented to Parliament by the Cabinet Secretary for Finance. The Scottish Government is committed to funding the completion of the two ferries currently under construction at the yard.
Thank you. Adam Tompkins, to be followed by Emma Harper.
Last week, the Fraser-Vanander Institute told the Finance Committee that no additional revenues have been raised by the SNP's income tax hikes because of weak growth in the Scottish tax base. So can the Minister tell me what specific policies are contained in this budget to grow the Scottish tax base?
Minister.
Well, in terms of our investment in this year's budget, it is significantly helped by our decisions about tax policy. And of course, I'm delighted that over the last year, there's been an additional £500 million to invest that wouldn't have been there if the Tories had had their way. But in terms of this budget significantly invests in our economy. It protects our reliefs, which the Tories were putting at risk as recently as last week. And it ensures that we have the most competitive relief scheme anywhere in the UK, lower than inflation rise in the poundage, a lower poundage rate for 95% of businesses in Scotland compared with the rest of the UK. But perhaps most significantly, it also invests significantly in infrastructure, which is a key way of boosting the economy.
Emma Harper, to be followed by Colin Smith.
In the report published on January the 27th by the Infrastructure Commission for Scotland, it states that we must have, and I quote, a presumption in favour of investment to future-proof existing road infrastructure to make it safer, resilient and more reliable. Given this, can the Minister therefore outline how much the Scottish Government has committed in its budget to improving roads infrastructure, especially for roads in the south-west of Scotland?
Minister.
Thank the member. We are committed to delivering transport projects which will help us to create the conditions for an inclusive and net zero emissions economy. And this government is increasing its budget for trunk road and structural repairs to over £123 million next year. And through the operating companies, will continue to safely maintain and operate the trunk road network. And in the South West, will continue to progress construction of the A77 bypass, with completion expected in summer 2021. And consideration of further improvements to the A75 and A77 will form part of the Strategic Transport Projects Review.
Colin Smith, to be followed by Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Bus passenger numbers have plummeted by a staggering 108 million journeys under the SNP. When Labour introduced the free bus pass for older people, it resulted in the biggest increase in bus passenger numbers we've had since devolution. Does the Minister accept that even with the measures in this budget, it won't begin to reverse the decline in bus usage, but if free bus travel was extended to young people, we really could start to halt the dismantling of our bus network taking place in every community now under this government?
First Minister.
Well, I'm sure the member therefore welcomes the commitment in this budget to increase overall funding for rail and bus services, including concessionary travel, by £286 million to a total of £1.15 billion next year. But the member mentioned free bus travel for under 25s, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea. I just want Labour to tell me how much it would cost.
Fulton McGregor, to be followed by Liam Kerr. Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Minister has outlined significant additional investment to complete the expansion of early learning childcare. Can she outline how much of this is expected to save families each year?
Minister.
This government will save families up to £4,500 per child per year.
Liam Kerr, to be followed by Willie Coffey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. From her statement, the Minister seems unaware that crime has risen for the last 2 years and violent crime for the last 4 years. Now, the Chief Constable says that without more cash and more officers, there will be a crisis in policing and some crimes will not be investigated. The Chief Constable says he can't afford to lose more officers and less than 50 million means he'll have to. So with this budget, is the Minister saying the Chief Constable is wrong? And can the Chief Constable take it that this is the statutory consent from the Minister that the SPA may add to the deficit?
Minister.
With this budget, I'm saying something quite simple. I'm saying that the overall SPA budget will increase by 3.6% next year, which is an additional £42.2 million. So for a member who takes an active interest in these things, I hope he will welcome our priority given to the police force and ensuring that there is figures in this budget to protect our police officers and to invest in the estate.
Willie Coffey, to be followed by Ian Gray.
Thank you. The Minister announced an extra £1 billion in infrastructure investment. Could she set out what's included in that funding and how many jobs that would support in Scotland? Thank you.
Minister.
Well, this £6.2 billion of investment is estimated to support over 40,000 full-time equivalent jobs in 2020-21. And the budget includes funding for an array of infrastructure to support our long-term ambitions for inclusive economic growth, building sustainable places and responding to the climate emergency. It includes over £200 million of funding for city, region and growth deals, £120 million for expansion of places for early learning and childcare, support for progress on our elective care health centres and funding required to meet our commitment to deliver 50,000 affordable homes.
Ian Gray, to be followed by Jenny Gilruth.
Thank you. The Minister has spoken several times of a rise in higher education funding, but that rise is half what Universities Scotland say they need and less than a tenth of the cuts they've suffered in recent years. Isn't that just continuing to sell this critical sector short?
Minister.
Well, I've already confirmed that this budget provides a real terms increase in funding for higher education and further education. The question for the Labour Party is whether they'll vote against that real terms increase or not.
Jenny Gilruth, to be followed by Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm sure fellow Justice Committee members, perhaps excluding Liam Kerr, will welcome the additional £37 million for the police budget. Will the Scottish Government continue to press the UK Treasury to pay back the £125 million in VAT paid by Police Scotland to the UK Treasury between 2013 and 2018?
Minister.
We will, of course, continue to press the UK Government on these matters, and considering how many spending asks the Tories have, it'd be nice if once in a while they directed those spending asks to their own UK Government.
Jamie Green, to be followed by Alistair Allen.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Despite warm words about improving transport and infrastructure, the detail in the budget paints a very different picture. To answer Emma Harper's question, there's an £85 million drop in funding for motorways in trunk roads. flatline budgets to support councils with cycling and walking, cuts to regional transport partnerships, cuts to smart card rollout, cuts to support for bus services. So let me ask you, Minister, given that the Green Party has placed a budget demand on you that the SNP backtrack on its existing commitments to improve Scotland's roads, is today's draft budget a worrying sign that the Scottish Government is capitulating to those ridiculous demands?
Interestingly enough, I don't recall additional spending on roads being one of the Tories' asks. No, exactly. So I wonder whether that is a new ask to add to their already under-costed lists of demands. But in terms of transport, I've already mentioned that we've increased overall spending for rail and bus service. We've increased investment in active travel. We've invested in the Future Transport Fund to help support that modal shift. There is significant investment in this budget. And if Jamie Green can't find in himself to welcome that, then I don't think there's that much hope for the general spend on transport.
Alistair Allen, to be followed by Mark Ruskell.
Presiding Officer, we know we need to repeat and extend the success of renewable electricity generation to renewable heat. Can the Minister expand on the measures outlined in the budget that will deliver on that ambition?
Minister.
Yes, I can. The £120 million heat transition deal announced today is an ambitious and broad package of capital investment which will ensure that we make demonstrable progress towards decarbonising our homes and our buildings. And the deal complements and further strengthens our policy framework for renewable heat. We'll shortly introduce a heat networks bill, which will help to de-risk investment in heat networks, and later this year we'll also set out further detail on the steps we will take to reduce emissions from heating Scotland's homes and buildings in our heat decarbonisation policy statement.
Mark Ruskell, to be followed by Bob Doris.
Kate Forbes will know through her constituency work the importance of investing in energy efficiency in our homes, which is one of the most transformational tools that we have to tackle the climate emergency and fuel poverty. And it's also a prerequisite for the investment on heat that she's just described. The Greens, the Climate Emergency Response Group, Citizens Advice Scotland, we've all called for the budget to be doubled, and yet we only see a very marginal increase in this budget. How will the government meet its own fuel poverty and climate targets without the scale of investment? And will Kate Forbes be prepared to bring that spirit of compromise and pragmatism to negotiations on this issue as well?
Minister. Well, I can confirm to the member that I have a great spirit of compromise, and I'm more than happy to talk to the member further about these issues. We recognise that in order to meet our climate change ambitions, we're going to have to consider our investment in every area of infrastructure. And whilst this budget demonstrates a significant increase in spend on green infrastructure, as it were, we are also increasing our spend on energy efficiency too.
Thank you. Bob Doris, to be followed by Graham Simpson.
And drug deaths are a major blight on the communities that I serve. Can I ask the Minister how this budget will support services for those in addiction and ultimately help them into recovery, including enhancing the provision of rehabilitation beds and improving the recovery pathway more widely?
Minister.
I thank the member for that question, and I can confirm that the significant increase in investment that we have committed to today in terms of funding to reduce harm from alcohol and drugs will look at different ways, different innovative ways, different projects in order to do that. Ultimately, we all want to see a reduction in drug deaths.
Thank you. Graham Simpson, to be followed by Mike Rumbles.
Thank you. If all councils increase council tax by the maximum amount, will any still have to make spending cuts?
Minister.
Well, we ensure that we work in partnership with local authorities, and as I've said repeatedly, we are ensuring that there's a cash increase going to local authorities of just short of £500 million. It's then for local authorities who have complete autonomy over 92% of their budget, how they spend that.
Mike Rumbles, to be followed by Annabel Ewing.
The Minister hasn't said anything at all about cutting waste in the budget. Does she have anything to say about, firstly, paying an extra £62 million for a botched fixed-price contract for the Aberdeen Western Peripheral Route, wasting over £200 million on ferries Calmac doesn't want, and wasting £40 million on a loss-making airport that's made losses every year for the last 10 years, That's over £300 million of... Now listen, that's over £300 million of waste. And I appreciate the advice he's getting from the Deputy First Minister.
Minister.
Well, I find that quite offensive, frankly, if the member thinks that investing £200 million on ferries that my constituents and the other constituents across this country need is a waste. I think he might find that his own constituents find it questionable that he thinks that spending on the AWPR was also a waste. We will continue to invest in infrastructure and transport projects as we intend to do through this budget.
Annabel Ewing, to be followed by Neil Findlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the MSP for Cowdenbeath constituency, can the Minister highlight the key benefits of the budget as far as the good people of Fife are concerned?
Minister.
Well, I can confirm to the member that this is a budget that delivers for the people of her constituency as it does for the people across this country. It provides certainty for ratepayers, it invests in our economy, it steps up our commitment to tackling climate change, and it tackles the challenges of child poverty. And I think those are all measures that every person in Scotland will welcome.
Neil Findlay, to be followed by Peter Chapman.
It's not unusual to support elements of the budget without supporting it in its entirety. Indeed, SNP groups on local authorities do this all the time. So, in that vein, can I welcome the fact that the Government has accepted my proposal on page 50 of the budget for a £1 million fund to help mesh-injured women? This will be warmly welcomed. And could I ask the Minister to bring forward the scheme to allow women to claim from that fund as quickly as possible?
Minister.
I thank Neil Findlay for the spirit in which he made those remarks and asked that question. And I'm glad that he welcomes that commitment. And I'm sure that in collaboration with the Health Secretary, we could look at these issues.
Peter Chapman, to be followed by Stuart Stevenson.
I thank you, Presiding Officer, and I declare an interest.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please.
They would likely complain if I didn't declare an interest, Presiding Officer. The Minister made much in her statement, and we all know how important the environment is. But I see agri-environment scheme payments are actually down again for the third year in a row. Hardly looking after the environment, Minister.
Minister.
I thank the member for that question, and we recognise that we need to work in partnership with our farmers and land managers in order to meet our commitments on climate change. And that's why I hope that he also welcomes the initial £40 million of investment in the Agricultural Transformation Programme, which is a programme that will develop pilot schemes to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, invest in on-farm renewables and tree planting, amongst other measures. So we're committed to supporting the agricultural industry, make that shift, and we want to do it in collaboration with them.
Thank you. Stuart Stevenson, to be followed by James Kelly. Stuart Stevenson.
Minister, I'm reading the carbon assessment of the budget proposals, and there's lots of good news there. Is there anything in particular that the Government is doing, besides what it says on page 4, where the emissions spending to mitigate emissions has increased? Can she give us any further information as to how spending is going to be targeted very specifically on carbon?
Well, I think what's interesting about this budget is not only the high-level figures in terms of our investment in peatland restoration, in the heat transition deal, in our future transport fund, and investing in our priorities. There's also significant investment in how we work with people in order to deliver on our commitments around climate change as well. I mentioned already the investment in the Agricultural Transformation Programme, but we are also developing, for example, the £50 million Heat Networks Early Adopter Challenge Fund for local authorities and a £10 million fund to support hydrogen heat demonstrator projects. So not only do we want to be at the forefront when it comes to our climate change commitments, we also want to be pioneering solutions that the rest of the world can adopt.
And James Kelly.
Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Page 145 of the budget book says in relation to the legal aid budget that it supports criminal defence and redress where rights are not being upheld. Can I therefore ask the Minister why the budget has been frozen at £137 million and no additional money has been provided for this crucial fund this year?
Minister. I think the member, I'd be happy to speak to this member more generally after this statement, but we remain committed, and I think that's demonstrated in the figures before him just now, in terms of continuing to invest in what is a very important area of our budget.
Thank you very much, and that concludes our budget statement. Thank you very much. We're going to move on shortly to our next item of business, which will be a debate on the Scottish Elections Reform Bill at stage 1. But we'll just take a short pause while members and ministers change seats. Just a short pause, not a suspension.
Thank you. The next item of business is a debate on motion 20740 in the name of Graham Day on the Scottish Election Reform Bill at stage 1. Can I invite members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now, and I call on Graham Day to speak to it and move the motion. Minister, please.
Presiding Officer, thank you. I want to begin by thanking the Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee for its scrutiny of the bill at stage 1. And for its report. I also want to thank the Local Government and Communities Committee for its valuable contribution to consideration of these issues that we are about to debate. Having heard evidence from a wide range of stakeholders, both committees have welcomed the proposals contained within the bill, although rightly they have sought to explore further some of the aspects of it. And this afternoon's debate, brief as it is, will afford us a chance to do just that. With the Scotland Act 2016 having transferred responsibility for Scottish elections to this Parliament, we have an opportunity to make meaningful and appropriate improvements to how we conduct elections here. And let me address some of the key components of the bill. Firstly, term lengths. We consulted extensively on whether the current 4-year terms for Parliament and local government remain the most appropriate approach. We propose moving both to 5-year terms, which will allow for greater stability in our electoral cycle. I wrote to all members seeking their thoughts last year, and I hope today's debate will help us reach a settled view on this. As a result of clashes with UK general elections, our last 2 sessions have been 5-year terms, and we need to decide what works best in Scotland. Having weighed the options, my own preference is for 5-year terms, and I welcome the support for this from the 2 committees. Changing term lengths will be one of several reforms affecting the Local Government Boundary Commission for Scotland in the bill. As members will be aware, the Commission's remit now includes boundaries for Scottish Parliament elections as well as local government and the areas and the wards related to that. And this change is reflected in a new name, Boundaries Scotland. Under this bill, Boundaries Scotland would have powers to recommend 2- and 5-member local government wards where that fits local circumstances and communities. The bill also allows for rolling boundary reviews, which 71% of respondents to our consultation supported. The current deadline for reviews in the bill reflects a 4-year term at 12 years. In response to the Stage 1 report, I have agreed that the local government review deadlines will be increased to 15 years, providing 5-year terms are adopted. The bill proposes that approval for local government boundary changes will no longer reside with ministers and will now require an affirmative procedure in this Parliament. The role of the Parliament is further expanded through provisions which make the Electoral Commission more directly accountable. The Commission would be funded and be accountable to the Scottish Parliamentary corporate body for the work it carries out in relation to devolved elections. The Commission would also be given powers to create codes of practice covering observers, third parties, candidate expenditure and donation controls. I'm pleased the Electoral Commission welcomes these reforms and the principles behind the bill, and I'm grateful to them for their ongoing engagement. The bill recognises the importance of other key stakeholders in Scottish elections. Expanding the Electoral Management Board's remit to Scottish Parliament elections is reflective of this. Since 2008, the Electoral Management Board has been an invaluable element of elections in Scotland, ensuring that they are delivered to a high standard. The Board assists local authorities in coordinating elections and referendums and promotes best practice through training and information for electoral professionals. This is vital work which strengthens our system and reinforces voter confidence, so I am pleased the Board will now provide direction for parliamentary elections also. Turning to other provisions, the bill will simplify registration of 14-year-olds. Those approaching legal voting age can already apply to be added to the electoral register as attainers, but the current system is needlessly complex and unclear. Our proposals mean anyone eligible in Scotland who is aged 14 will be able to register as an attainer. It's a small change, but one that makes a big difference to young people's participation, and it has been welcomed by both the committee and our colleagues in the Scottish Youth Parliament. The bill updates existing legislation to enable electronic voting solutions in future. The initial aim is to use technology to support voters with sight loss to vote independently and in secret. After engagement with stakeholders, we are undertaking a limited field trial of electronic ballot delivery to assist those with sight loss. Like the committee, I do not think the time is right for internet voting, but it is important to allow Parliament to explore its options once technology is more established. And to be clear, any pilots of electronic voting solutions proposed by Scottish ministers will be considered by Parliament. The bill creates an offence to vote more than once at local government elections, aligning these with the rules for Scottish Parliament and UK elections. The bill also ensures the existing power of the presiding officer to postpone Scottish Parliament elections operates if Parliament has already been dissolved. This is important to minimise risk to the public during emergencies or unexpected events, and it addresses a gap in the powers of the post holder in this area at present. On a final note, I appreciate the committees have highlighted there are opportunities for further reforms, and I agree. But this bill is a significant step forward in many important areas, although, as I say, by no means the end of the journey. There's also an important point about proper consultation and care when considering reforms. Like the committee, I'm sympathetic to members wanting to tackle the alphabetical bias of the list order effect, but I also agree that options must be carefully researched to avoid disadvantaging voters. We must, for example, respect the needs of those with disabilities and the neurodiversity of the electorate. As the committee report states, and I quote, "There is no point simply replacing one set of problems with another." And that echoed my own comments at the committee evidence session when I said that we should not change simply for change's sake. But that is not a signal for inaction. We need to find a better way forward that does not have obvious drawbacks. I appreciate much of the content of this bill is highly technical. Boundary changes and powers of the Electoral Commission sound quite dry in isolation. But what we're seeing is we should value rigorous independent oversight of our system, and this bill enhances that. The Reform Bill brings in these changes to support stakeholders and reassure the public, building on strong foundations of partnership working and our proposals to widen the franchise. I want to finish as I started by thanking the committees for their engagement, and I look forward to this afternoon's debate. And I move that the Parliament agrees to the general principles of the Scottish Elections Reform Bill. Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I may have missed this. Did you move the motion?
I did.
You did. That's my fault. I now call Bill Kidd on behalf of the Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee. Convener, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And as convener of the Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee, I am very pleased to speak in this debate on behalf of the committee. The Scottish Elections Reform Bill proposes a number of changes, as has been mentioned, to electoral practice and administration in Scotland. It's a technical bill, but it is also an important one. It's a vital bill in that any changes to our elections in Scotland work effectively and enhance the democratic process. The electoral system needs to be accessible to everyone who has the right to vote. I'm grateful to committee members for working together to produce a unanimous report on the bill. I also acknowledge the experts in the field of running elections who generously gave up their time to inform our scrutiny of the bill. The bill contains a number of different provisions, but I would like to highlight the main conclusions reached by the committee. We heard different views on the relative merits of 4- and 5-year terms for Scottish Parliament and local government elections, and ultimately the committee was satisfied that the balance of evidence supports a move to 5-year terms for both these elections. This schedule will make clashes between elections less frequent, and there is also an argument that a 5-year term will allow more time for policy development. The committee also supported the proposal in the bill to allow 2- and 5-member wards for local government elections. We anticipate that this will be particularly useful in more remote or rural areas. And we did hear some concerns about the impact of 2-member wards on the proportionality between votes cast and wards won. The committee believes 2-member wards should only be recommended in very exceptional circumstances, such as remoter rural areas. And that includes islands also. The committee supports the proposal in the bill to make it an offence to vote more than once at Scottish local government elections held on the same day. This brings local government elections into line with UK and Scottish Parliament elections. However, we were not clear how this provision will be enforced, as there are challenges in cross-referring between electoral registers as they stand. The committee welcomes the approach being proposed by the Scottish Government in relation to electronic voting. There is a need to proceed with caution in relation to relatively untested technology. The proposal to undertake pilots is welcome, as is the focus on smaller scale improvements to enhance the accessibility of the voting process, particularly for people with disabilities, as has been mentioned. We suggest the Scottish Government should accelerate this engagement with groups representing disabled people. There were a number of other provisions in the bill which were welcomed by the committee, for example, a simplification of the rules to allow anyone over 14 to register as an attainer before they are officially old enough to vote. The committee also took evidence on some topics which weren't included in the bill. For example, we heard evidence about the list order effect. This is when candidates nearer the top of the ballot paper are more likely to be selected. This is potentially unfair to candidates in elections whose surname is further down the alphabet. There was no consensus on how the list order effect should be addressed. We recommended that the Scottish Government should ask the Electoral Commission to take a wider look at different approaches to ballot design. Another issue highlighted by the committee was the requirement that candidates' addresses appear on ballot papers for local government elections. Yes, of course. Thank you. Yes, certainly.
Richard Lyle.
Consultation put forward proposals for removing the current legal requirement for candidates' addresses to appear on a ballot paper in local government elections. I've actually written to ministers and asked, is it also intended to allow candidates to have their addresses withheld from publication, either on council websites or notice boards on council premises, so as to protect possibly former abused applicants?
Bill Kidd.
Thank you very much. This was discussed also, and thank you very much for raising it again. The fact is that a number of people raised concerns with us about security and safety. This has been a long-term issue with a number of people. The committee was pleased that the Minister has agreed to address this issue as soon as possible, and I'm sure he is sitting here today, he will listen to the wider element that has been mentioned by Mr Lyle, and thank you very much for raising that. The committee also noted that there will continue to be scope to reform the electoral system in the future. For example, there is a need to address the important issue of under-registration. The committee was also supportive of the idea of reviewing the multi-member system for local government elections. To conclude, Presiding Officer, the Scottish Elections Reform Bill proposes a range of changes to electoral law covering Scottish Parliament and local government elections. These proposed changes in the bill have been broadly welcomed on that basis, and the committee was content to recommend to Parliament that the general principles of the bill be agreed to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr King.